This is Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things. My guest today is Judge Chris McCool of the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. Judge McCool is running for a vacant seat at the Alabama Supreme Court, and it is an honor to have you here, Judge.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Well, we'll just start by asking why you're running for the Alabama Supreme Court.
Well, it's for a similar reason that I ran for the Court of Criminal Appeals. As you probably know, our court system is made up of trial courts and appellate courts. I spent 25 years, basically, of my career in the trial courts of this state. I was a prosecutor. I was district attorney in Pickens, Fayette, and Lamar County, which is the 24th Judicial Circuit, for most of that career. And when it came time for me to consider this move, I just believe experience matters. And having the experience in the trial court has really helped me. I've served now for 4 years on the Court of Criminal Appeals. And at the appellate court level, we don't try cases. We read the transcripts of cases that have been tried and the briefs of the parties. And so, you know, I think it's important to have people on these appellate courts that know what they're looking at when they read the cold words of on the pages of the transcript. You know, I know what I'm looking at. I've been there and done that, and I found that to be the case. It's been very significant and helpful to me serving for the last 4 years on the appellate court. And so, having been on the appellate court now for the last 4 years, I want to take that experience both in trial and on the appellate courts to the Alabama Supreme Court, and that's the primary reason I'm running. I think also, you know, judicial philosophy matters. It's important that we have people on our courts that understand that they're not legislators, that they're not making law, that they're not being activists. We don't need judges who are judicial activists. We need judges that are going to apply the law that the legislature passes, and I think that's important too. And you know, I guess really ultimately, we need, just in general in our society, we need more common sense. I grew up on a farm. You know, I grew up working hard and working with the land, and I still manage that farm today. You know, you don't do that for 55 years and not learn a little bit of common sense. So all those things together, they seem to be, they're important to me, and I think they're important to our judicial system. And with this open seat that's being vacated, I felt like it was the time to do this.
Well, I was going to ask you about growing up on the farm a little later, but since you brought it up, I'm wondering what lessons you learned from the labor and the tenacity required to operate a farm, both through, you know, for generations, actually. The farm's been in your family for multiple generations.
That's right. I'm at least the 5th generation, and it's possibly the 6th. We're not sure about my great-great-great-grandfather, but we think he lived on the same road there that I live on. It's the name of the road is McCool Road. People get all excited about the fact that I have a road named after me, but I always remind them it's a dirt road. But it is my road. So, but seriously, yeah, you know, my dad was Harold McCool. He passed away in 2020. But coming up on the farm, my brother and I, it was just the two of us, and there was no option to not work. There was no option but to work. We had 8 chicken houses and about 200 head of cattle throughout the years. So we were, you know, there was no doubt what we would be doing when we came home from school. It wasn't going out to play with our friends. It was getting ready, getting changed, and getting out there on the farm to feed the cows, to work the cows, to work in the chicken houses, whatever. And I think what you learn from that is 2 things really. It's hard work. You don't get anywhere without working hard. I mean, I struggle maybe with some of the folks I see in the generation today, that this entitlement idea. Well, there's no entitlement. There was no entitlement on Harold McCool's farm. You got out of it what you put into it, and if you weren't putting into it what you should, he had ways of motivating you that I won't talk about here. He would make sure we did. And the other thing you learn is that if you do work hard and you are diligent, that you can always figure out the problem. That's served me well in so many areas. You go looking at a fence that's down, or you look at a motor that's messed up in the chicken house or whatever. You can figure out a solution, but it requires diligence and, again, common sense. You learn about them. I mean, I think it's important. One of the problems that I see in our society today is we've become disconnected from the land, and people think that that grocery stores make food. Listen, I know where food comes from, and I know how much hard work it takes to produce it, and I think we need to not forget that. Our farmers are heroes in my book, and they're often overlooked.
Well, faith is very important to you, and you're probably the only judge I know who preaches on Sundays. I want you to talk a little bit about your faith and how you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God in your day-to-day life as a judge and as a human being.
Well, all right. So I didn't start out as a preacher. I've always spoken in churches from the time I was 18 or 19 years old until I was 40. But in 2007, the year I turned 40, I'd been struggling with the call to preach. I'd been running from it, frankly. And as Jonah teaches us, you don't get very far, and it doesn't turn out well when you're running from the Lord. And so I finally acknowledged and submitted to the call to preach in 2007. And then in 2011, I became pastor of Zion Primitive Baptist Church, which is about 2 miles from my house. My great-grandfather McCool had pastored that church in the early to mid-1900s, and I had a great uncle that pastored it. And as I began to look into the history, and we still have the original minutes from 1847 when it was constituted, my great-great-great-grandfather, who was not a McCool, was the first pastor of the church. So, it was kind of strange. It's not a hereditary thing by any means, but the Lord called me to pastor that church. And one thing I tell my congregation is that you don't have Sunday clothes you put on and then take them off and put on your Monday clothes and forget about what you did on Sunday. The kingdom of God is not a one-day concept. It's an everyday concept. If you're doing it the way the Bible teaches you, then you're going to be loving, doing justice, doing justly, and loving mercy, and walking humbly with your God every single day. You shouldn't go to church and be one way and then show up at work on Monday and be a different way. People ought to know there's something different about you. And so the faith that I believe that ought to inform us is the faith, that biblical faith that teaches us how to treat one another, and the fact that justice is, God is a just God. God is a righteous God. And he doesn't just, he's not just theoretically righteous. Abraham, in the 18th chapter of Genesis, when God was going down to visit Sodom and Gomorrah, but he was talking to Abraham about it, Abraham started negotiating with him about Lot's life, if you find 10 there, that sort of thing. Abraham asked the question, which in a sense was a rhetorical question, but it's very important to remember. He said, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" And the idea of justice and righteousness is not just a theoretical concept, it's an action. It's kind of like love. Love is not just a feeling, it's an action. And that's what my point is that if we're going to be like God, me in particular as a judge, I'm going to be seeking always to do the right thing, do justice. And I think, you ask how does my faith inform me? That's how it informs me. And we love mercy. There's places to show compassion. But ultimately, it's following the law. God never violates his own law. And he was such I don't want to get to preaching too much here, but he was such a righteous God that he had to send his son to pay the debt for his people, because otherwise he would have had to impose that penalty upon them. And so, that's where I think more than anything else, faith should inform us when we're trying to do right. We're trying to do justice and love mercy, and in doing so, not be high and lifted up, but walk humbly with God, because remembering that we're just sinners too.
Well, you're out campaigning now for your seat, and that can be tough for some judges. Some judges like to be behind the scenes and like to be sort of academic and in their cloistered environment and writing their opinions. What are some of the challenges and joys of being on the campaign trail? I imagine you get to meet a lot of different people.
A lot of folks, a lot of folks. I love that part of it. To go back to what you said, you know, judges in general should be behind the scene. You know, I think recently Justice Greg Cook, who just took the bench, one of his themes in his campaign was he was going to be boring and predictable. And the idea there, I get, is that you shouldn't be standing out, and you shouldn't be, you know, our executive branch, our governor, they can get in front of the bully pulpit and that sort of thing. But judges in general should be, you know, should maybe be seen and not heard. Kind of, you know, you read their opinions, that's how they speak. But when you run for that office, you know, in Alabama, we're elected. So there's that tension there. You got to be careful what you say. I can't go out, for example, and comment on any cases before me, and I can't comment on cases that might come before me. But what I can do, and I think should do, is be accountable to the people. I shouldn't be cloistered, as you said, and so I like that idea of getting out. It's a long, you know, it's long driving, a lot of long hours driving. I told somebody the last time I ran, I put 62,000 miles on my vehicle in 1 year. And I've already put nearly 4,000 or 3,500 on my vehicle since the first of the year in my campaigning. But I told somebody that I learned two things. I learned that number one, it's a big state, and number two, Gordo's not near anything. So I had to drive a long ways to get anywhere from Gordo. But I'll just say that I love meeting the people of Alabama, and getting to campaign statewide last time and this time has been a joy. To go to the Wiregrass and to meet folks there, go to Huntsville and the folks there, and you know, I'm not just holed up over in West Alabama anymore, and I've gotten to know this state pretty well.
Well, I've been in higher education for a long time, and I've talked to many different students over the years about their career plans and ambitions, and almost never will a student say to me, I want to be a judge. That never happens. So let's go back to your experience as an undergraduate. You studied history and classics at the University of Alabama, and I suspect at that time you weren't telling yourself, I want to be a judge. But what were you thinking at that time? What brought you to those particular subjects? And you also served in student government, so I want to ask you about that as well.
So let me begin by saying the advice I've given to my children that have gone to college is, don't worry too much about where you're going to end up. Major in something you enjoy, because even if it doesn't seem very practical, if you enjoy it, you'll do well in it, and that will open doors. So for example, my youngest daughter, who just got her master's in art history, you know, she started out in art history, she got her master's in art history. Well, you know, I used to kid her and say, well, I guess that means I'm going to have to take care of you till you marry, because you won't be able to get a job in that field. Well, guess what? She's now teaching 4 classes in the art history department at Alabama and 1 at Shelton State. Didn't really plan that, didn't know where she would end up, but she loved it, and she did well and graduated with a red cap, you know, all A's. So that's the approach I took in undergraduate. I went to the University of Alabama in 1985 with a plan to become a doctor. I got in there in the first year, and I just really did not like chemistry. I took 101 and 102, and I said, oh, I can't do this. So I said, well, maybe business. Well, in the next year, my sophomore year, I took accounting. I said, this is not for me. Then I began to look around and said, what have I been taking that I enjoy? And history. History was my favorite subject. And I said, well, I'm going to major in history. In the meantime, I had to take a foreign language, so I said, I'll take Greek. Not many people do, you know, and so I loved it. So I ended up, over the course of my 5 years of undergrad, I took the 5-year route, I loved history and I loved Greek, and so classics with a concentration in Greek was my double major. Well, after a while, you know, coming to the end of your career, what are you going to do? My intention all along had been to go back and farm. I had never intended to leave the farm. I loved farming, still do today. But I got towards the end of that undergraduate career and said, you know, about the only two things I can do with this degree are farm or teach. But then I said, well, what about law school? Let me try that out. So I went to law school, took the LSAT, went to law school, began in 1990, and I loved it. And then by the second year, between my second and third year, I went back and worked for the only lawyer in Gordo, which is where I grew up and where I still live today. And I love that. The country practice of law, I loved it. I fell in love with it, so I said, this is what I want to do. I was still thinking I might go back and farm, because there's a guy who's a lawyer in Pickens County who's a sawmiller, and he never did really practice, but maybe a year or two, but so he didn't actually practice law, but it helped him. But I found that I love that country practice of law, dealing with the people and helping them. And then a couple of years later, I got hired on as a full-time assistant DA, and still never thinking, oh, I'm going to be on the Court of Criminal Appeals one day or be a judge one day. So, you know, it just took, you know, following one step, followed another, and so next thing you know, here I am.
When you were at Alabama studying history, did you happen to take any classes with Forrest McDonald by chance? He was a faculty member there.
I knew Professor McDonald, but I never took one of his classes. Every time I tried to take one of them, somebody else was teaching it. So, but yes, I did. I knew him. I sure did.
And when you were in law school, did you have any particular classes that appealed to you more than the others? Or professors?
Well, two professors, particularly Dean Gamble, Charles Gamble, who wrote the book basically on evidence, and his classes on evidence were great. And you know, evidence. I understand now that there are many law schools not requiring evidence, which I think is crazy, because you know, you can know all the tort law you want to know, all the contract law, all the property law. You can know even the civil procedure. Okay, as a lawyer put it to me one time, an older lawyer, he said, those are the bones and the sinews and the muscles, but the blood is the evidence law. If you don't know how to get a contract entered into evidence, if you don't know how to overcome a hearsay objection, if you don't know the evidence law, then all you've got is a dead body of law. The evidence animates that body. And so that was one of my favorite classes. And of course, Dean Gamble is still a dear friend to this day, but he was such a good teacher. And then Professor Busey, Pamela Busey, who is Pamela Pearson now, she taught criminal law. And that was really intriguing to me. That was my first year. And she was a great professor and still a friend as well today. They're both retired, but they were really, really good friends and great teachers.
You've been involved in leadership roles in government and civics organizations and the state bar. Is there a lesson there for young people about the importance of getting involved in the community?
Absolutely. I've always felt strongly that I didn't want to be on the sidelines. You know, I played football when I was in high school, and we went to the state championship that year, my senior year, and we lost. We were state runners-up. But what kept coming back to me is we were in the game, and Andy Hamlin is now the district attorney he took my place. He was my chief deputy district attorney for several years, and he and I talked often about how that we might not always win. We might not always achieve the result we want, but by golly, we were in the game. We were fighting. We were in the trenches. And I didn't want to get to the end of my career and think, you know, I hadn't really done anything. I hadn't really affected anything. You know, I hadn't been a positive influence on anybody. So all my life, all my career, I've tried to make sure I was in the game and I was doing something positive for the community. It started in high school, but in particular in undergraduate. I got involved in the SGA Senate. I was an independent. I wasn't in the fraternity, but which was a kind of a handicap in a sense. But I got elected that first year as one of 16 off-campus senator seats, and then I served in the Senate another year. Then I got appointed to the student court, and then in law school I served as Chief Justice of the student court in undergraduate. I served as an associate justice and then chief justice of the honor court in law school. So I've always tried to be involved. And the lesson I would say to young folks is, you know, wherever you are, get involved. And I'm still involved in my community in different organizations. You know, we've got an old schoolhouse that my dad went to that's our community center now. And I say I live in Gordo, and that's my address, but I actually live in a community named Zion Community, which is about 10 miles north of Gordo. We have a community center that's needing work, and I've been involved in trying to help rejuvenate that and that sort of thing. So get involved. You can make a difference wherever you are, and you should try. You shouldn't just be sitting on the sidelines.
What do you enjoy the most about your current role, sitting on the appellate bench and being a judge, looking at all kinds of criminal matters that are coming before you, matters filed by prisoners, matters filed on appeal, all kinds of different issues? What about that is the most appealing to you?
So to understand what I'm about to say, you probably need to understand where I was for most of my career. I was in the trial courts. I was district attorney, which meant I was in charge of the 3 counties, Pickens, Fayette, Lamar County, of all the criminal cases in those counties. And a lot of what I did, especially in regard to our plea dockets and our trial dockets, was shepherding cases through that system. And it was rare that we could really do a deep dive into the law. Most, you know, you've seen one burglary case, you've seen most all of them, you know, and so it wasn't like we had to go and do a lot of legal research. And I loved the law. I found a love for the law in law school. And so, as I said, we dealt with it, and we had cases where we did have to get deep into some legal doctrine or something that I wasn't familiar with. But now that I'm on this court, that's all we do is do deep dives in the law. You know, a misdemeanor case when I was district attorney was not as high on the priority list as a capital murder. But on this court, I've spent months looking at issues in a misdemeanor appeal. You know, we obviously still, in some sense, prioritize death penalty cases. But in this case, you know, in this court, you know, it's important, you know, what happens in every case, and we can take the time to get down into the law, and we can affect the law. And what I mean by that is not make it, but we can clarify it where it's needed. We can set it back right where it's been off, maybe from the statutory law and that sort of thing. So I like that. I miss the people. You know, one of the first things that I did after I'd been on the court for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'd been down here in Montgomery in our chambers, and I have 3 staff attorneys working for me. We're all in the same little room. It's not a huge office, but it's, you know, we got our own little offices. And I was sitting there one day and I was thinking, what is it that's strange about this? And I realized nobody was talking. They were researching, I was researching, they were writing, you know, and suddenly I said, you know, I'm working in a library. But that's important, you know, whereas when I was district attorney, I had people knocking on the door, calling on the phone, talking to somebody, you know, something constantly going. But this gives us an opportunity to really figure out what the law is and apply it like it should be.
Well, I'll end with a hypothetical. Let's say you're on the campaign trail and you're at a farmer's market or something, any kind of campaign event, and a young 18-year-old comes up to you and says, Judge, I'm just not sure what it is I want to do with my life. I don't know whether I want to go to college. I don't know if I go to college what I'll study. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. What do you tell somebody looking for that type of direction?
You know, the first thing I tell them, and this has nothing to do with being a judge or a lawyer, I would say you need to talk with the Lord and seek His guidance, and don't be looking for signs and wonders. And sometimes it's not the obvious thing. You know, I think the Lord leads us by peace, by giving us peace. You know, I've sought the sign. The problem with seeking signs is you'll find them, and it'll end. You may end up in the wrong place. So, but just, you know, seek spiritual guidance. Okay, first of all, but secondly, don't be afraid to step out. You know, I insisted that my you know, that my children at least consider college. Okay, and 3 of mine, one of them's still in college. He's about to be a senior. 2 graduated from college, but my oldest daughter, she went to college for a year and then decided to go become a dental hygienist. And now she's a stay-at-home mom. I'm fine with that. It doesn't have to be college. It doesn't have to be some arts and sciences academic pursuit. although I strongly encourage that liberal arts education. And when I say liberal, I'm not talking about liberal like we think of it now. It's just the idea of learning, you know, Greek, Latin, the ancients, the Greeks, the Romans, that sort of thing. But don't be afraid to take a chance, and don't be afraid to go to college and decide this is not what I want to be in. My oldest son was kind of like me. He went 2 years thinking he wanted to be a dentist, and he changed his major in his junior year and became an accountant. And by the way, he also double majored in Greek. But so he had accounting and Greek. And I always told him, people asked about that, I said, well, he wanted to learn 2 languages nobody understands. But that's what I would do. Step out, take a chance. Don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to change if it turns out you're going in the wrong direction.
Well, thank you very much, Judge. We really appreciate having you on the show. Step out, take a chance, and have a little risk, and pursue what you love. You heard it from Judge Chris McCool, our guest today. This has been a program of the Sorrell College of Business, Success Stories. I am your host, Alan Mendenhall, Associate Dean of the Sorrell College of Business and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center, signing off. Thank you for watching.